So I have a number of sponsors, affiliate links in the way that it's set up that have kindly allowed me to share their services, really. The first one is Mike Lane, and Mike runs online PM courses, and it is a great resource for getting those fundamentals of project management trained, reasonably priced, and Mike presents it in an accessible and clear manner. You can check out some of his videos on his YouTube channel and kind of give you a view of where they are. But the code for that, if you go to nigelcreaser.com/online PM courses, all one word, lowercase, that'll redirect you to it. There's varying different levels that you can buy. You can buy individual courses, you can buy pathways as well, if you like. And I get a kickback off those. Mike kindly shares me that. So if you do jump on and use it, I hope you find it really useful. I think he has money back guarantees and things like that as well. So there's very limited risk on that. So jump on that, and that again is nigelcreaser.com/online PM courses, and enjoy. I am delighted today to welcome Adam Boddison to the show. Professor Adam Boddison, OBE, in fact. I think you're the first OBE on the show. You're not the first professor. Adam currently serves as Chief Executive of the Association for Project Management and the chartered membership for the project management profession. Throughout his career at APM, Adam has spearheaded initiatives aimed at advancing the project profession to the highest standards, ensuring it meets the evolving demands of a complex world, which I'm sure we'll get into. At the forefront of Adam's agenda is promoting the indispensable role of project management across diverse sectors. His advocacy extends beyond conventional understanding of project manager role, challenging misconceptions and highlighting the universal applicability of project management principles. Through the collaborations with renowned research entities like PwC, Adam is also instrumental in showcasing the economic value of project management and advocating for its equivalence as an established profession. Outside the APM, he brings a diverse experience to the table, as a notable example being his tenure as CEO of NASCENT, the National Association for Special Educational Needs, where he spearheaded a turnaround and growth strategy resulting in a tenfold increase in membership over 5 years. He's also served as director for the Centre for Professional Education at the University of Warwick, achieving outstanding ratings for teacher training provision and leading international education projects. He's authored several books, has a diverse set of skills, extending to clinical hypnotherapy and all manner. So, Adam, thank you for coming on the show. I'm sure we'll get into a load of that there. That's a big intro.
Yeah, there's lots to say there. I suppose the only thing you probably didn't say was about my personal background. I am, like probably many of your listeners, father of 3 children who are 16, 13 and 11. Actually, 16, 14, 11. It sounds like I should know that, didn't I? But the ages keep changing. It makes it difficult to remember.
Yeah. I wish they just stick with it, wouldn't it?
Yeah. So yeah, that's what I do in my spare time, if that's a thing.
Yeah. Well, that's brilliant. So, like I said, it's you obviously we've connected over your connection with the APM, but obviously you've had a career before that, and we talked about a couple of points there. Sort of like, I guess people certainly people in the UK who know you will be able to pick up on your accent. But so, where were you born and bred and that sort of thing, and what did you want to be when you wanted to grow up? What do you want to be when you grow up, if you're like me?
Well, it's interesting. So to come back to the kind of location piece, so I actually grew up in Birkenhead, So for people that might not know where that is, that's not far away from Liverpool. So they call us plastic Scousers from over the water. So we have a kind of soft Scouse accent. So I grew up there, but then moved to the Midlands when I went to university. I went to Warwick and find it very hard to leave. So I ended up there for over a decade, working and researching and all kinds of things. And I kind of met my wife in the Midlands. And so we kind of met there. And because she was from Cambridge, the other side of the country, we thought, yeah, the Midlands is halfway between Liverpool and Cambridge. We'll stay here. So that's where I've stayed. So I still live in Coventry, and so I have this weird accent, which is kind of, I suppose, half Scouse, half Brummie. Yeah.
It's to me, it doesn't. There's no Brummie lilt in there. I can kind of hear that Birkenhead, which is like where I am. It's 40 miles away from there. My brother worked at the Harley garage near Cheshire Oaks there for many years. Yeah. So yeah, so right on the kind of the cusp of heading into that area, isn't it?
It is.
So you said you went to university at Warwick, and what did you study there? I'm guessing it probably wasn't project management, was it?
No, mathematics. So I was always good at maths in school. In fact, having done my maths degree, my first job was actually as a maths teacher. And weirdly, even back then, when I was teaching A-level maths, I was teaching things like critical path analysis to my A-level students with no idea whatsoever that 20 years or whatever down the line that might actually turn out to be quite useful for quite different reasons. And I suppose having been involved in maths teaching, I then, kind of worked my way through kind of leadership of schools. I was involved in running the Warwick University's kind of teacher training department, and had a fairly broad portfolio there, which included all kinds of interesting things like running a social network for gifted teenagers. So I was their academic principal. What else did I do? I was involved in kind of international development work. So I did quite a lot of education projects in different parts of the world, like Kazakhstan and the Middle East and Australia and things like that, and involved in education research. In fact, the interesting bit of education research I did was looking at the use of video conferencing in schools. And I remember the feedback I had at the time. This is a long time ago, pre-pandemic, and the feedback was, schools would never use video conferencing because it's always good. It's always good to have children in schools. That is the way, the only way it will ever be. Adam, this research is useless, and of course, like with all kinds of research like this, even when you think it's useless, it turns out to be something useful at some point to someone.
Yeah, I imagine you're with your kids at their age, they'll be similar to my youngest, who's 13, who absolutely hates the idea of Teams and video conferencing, because when in the rare occasions in the UK we get a flurry of snow and we have a snow day, when we were growing up, we wouldn't be in school, whereas they are at home in school doing that. So it's kind of destroyed that concept of a snow day that we always used to have.
Well, I thought that, but I mean, this week, for your listeners who may not know, this week it is lots of snow here, and there are schools closed up and down the country, and there are proper snow days happening. There's not online learning and I'll tell you why. It's because I think teachers like a snow day as much as the students. Everybody loves a snow day. I think it's like a rite of passage, right?
Yeah. Well, it seemed. I think last year when it happened, it was kind of like, I think it wasn't too bad. So part of the school was open, but some of the teachers couldn't get in, so they only had a partial set. So her year and a year above her wasn't in, but they were doing remote learning because there was enough people to do the remote learning. It was just the physical side of it, and she felt really cheated that she didn't get that snow day. I think I should remember. Yeah, I don't blame her. Yeah, building snowmen, and the same with work though. That's the same scenario with work as well. You had that time back when, if it was really bad, you couldn't get into an office and the laptop didn't exist, or if it was only to the executives who were important enough to have one, and everyone else couldn't work, could they? So it is an interesting dynamic and change on that. And education that's the thing that I noticed actually from the stuff and looking at your background, because obviously when you took on leadership of APM, which I can't remember when it was, it's 4 or 5 years ago now.
Only 3.5 years ago now. Seems like a long time. We've done a lot in that time. I think that's why.
Yeah, well, So just looking at that was the thing I noticed when looking at your bio and things like that, was that your background in education stands out and on that side of it, and your involvement and passion for that. And I suppose it's interesting how you've gone from that very much the academic world, and I know that the APM is still kind of it's adjacent to that academia, but very much dealing with corporate demand and corporate needs in it. Well, what was it that made you take a jump? What was it made you change and pick up that role? Was it just out of curiosity really on that?
Well, it was never the plan. I didn't kind of wake up 20 years and go, do you know what? I've got this 20-year plan to go and be the chief exec of APM. It didn't quite work like that. So it was opportunistic, really. But if I kind of describe the journey, so I talked about doing the teacher training and the university side of things. One of the interesting things about working in an academic institution that people outside of them probably are less aware of is, yes, they are teaching and learning and research institutions, but they're also, businesses in their own right, and they're quite complex businesses. And so the opportunities, if you're working somewhere like that, to kind of build up kind of commercial acumen and get that commercial experience is quite interesting in quite a range of different contexts. So that was my kind of first opportunity to build up some of my commercial knowledge, particularly in the international space that I talked about before. I then went to run my first professional body and charity, which you mentioned earlier on, NASEN, the National Association for Special Educational Needs. And that was a relatively small organisation. But I went in there as chief exec, and anyone who's worked in a small organisation will know this truth, which is that there is no fewer jobs to do when you're in a small organisation. There are just fewer people to do the jobs.
Yeah.
So although I was, nominally chief exec, it was quite hands-on. Everybody was doing a bit of everything, and that's a great grounding as well, because you then get to understand the full breadth and depth of many different parts of the organisation. And in the 6 years I was there, I became almost pigeonholed, I would say, as a kind of special needs specialist. I didn't describe myself as that, but other people did. And that was really nice of people to say that, but equally, I wanted to do more than special needs, and I wanted to do something broad. But because NASEN was also a membership association, it was also a kind of educational association, I thought, is there something that I can use that same experience of, but go broad? And this is where APM came in. I thought, this is great because it's pan-sector, so I get that breadth that I'm looking for. It's a membership association like I've had before. At its heart, it's about qualifications and standards and learning and professional development and, evidence-based, policy development and so on. So a lot of my experience in very different areas came kind of quite naturally together in an unexpected way, I would say, but it's turned out to be quite helpful. And look, when I went for the job, I've no doubt that I was up against people who would have been, long-standing project professionals who know the role, and the profession inside out far better than I did. But I do think there is some inherent value with coming to a role like this without necessarily being too tied up with the politics of the profession and the kind of the institutional memory of the profession as well, because you can bring a fresh perspective to things.
Yeah, I can. It's interesting because I've one of my hobbies is judo, and there's again, you see it with sports organisations where you will get a CEO coming in or MD or sort of thing that will come into those sports organisations who aren't necessarily elite athletes at that sport, but they bring. But the thing is being able to throw someone on a judo mat isn't the same as being able to ensure grant funding for your sport, and those skills aren't. Now, doesn't mean those people can't have the same skills, and you have the people on the ground in that. You'd have an understanding of people who come from ground up, gone through elite level. That's great, but that commercial side of it, that ability to look at team management and things like that, there are different sets of skills, aren't they? And I suppose it is that thing of. We see a lot of time, and you'll have seen it, and we'll all been taught there's training out there when you've got someone who's a really talented contributor in a role that gets moved into a management role, and then they struggle because they haven't been given the backup, the training, or the understanding, or the experience to do that management role. I imagine in these situations, again, running these sort of things where you've got specialist architects or specialist engineers, or, as you say, specialist project managers that won't necessarily they can get those skills, but they won't necessarily naturally have those skills to run an organisation.
Yeah, I think that's right. And the thing is, I've never claimed that I'm a project professional, or in my last job that I was a special needs expert.
No.
In fact, my pitch when I went for the interview was quite the opposite. It was almost, look, you've got thousands of project professionals at your fingertips. Is that what you need to run this organization? And in my view, it wasn't necessarily what they needed. It's part of what they need, but it's not the only thing. And it's that combination of expertise that I think really helps to scale an organization and to move it forwards.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, I can see that. So let's talk about that. And I suppose, and I pre-warned you a little bit some of my awkward questions that I was going to ask you. Sort of, and I imagine that you've kind of thought about one of your key things across any kind of education is, especially when you've got, I think there's a perception of going through qualifications through that you have to have. That's one thing. Qualifications through a university where the expectations societal wise is go to university, get your degree, and then move on to those when you've got those sort of career progressions. When you've got something like APM or any other those sort of certifications where it's not mandated, so you haven't got to have it to do the job, it costs money, and to an individual it costs money that it's quite difficult to see a direct correlation of the value, unless someone's saying we only want a person with this certain qualification. And then organisationally as well, whilst training your people is good, there's again getting that certification. There'll be organisations out there that have got their own certification or that sort. And I know I have my own views. I'm kind of devil advocate here, but yeah, it's kind of is that a challenge you get back, or is it something that you consciously think about? And I guess there's several different stakeholder groups that you have to talk to about in different ways. How do you see that? What is the reason for having the APM certification, for example, for a project manager out there?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's not simple. So, I mean, let's pick up on the kind of regulated profession bit first of all, which you kind of touched on there. There was long been a debate, I think, about whether the project profession should be regulated or not. I actually think, irrespective of what your answer is to that question, I actually don't think it's possible to regulate it because it's so complex. I'm deliberately using project profession there rather than project management profession because the range of different specialist roles that you have, some of which don't even have the word project or program in the job title. I think it would just be really, really difficult to regulate in the way that we might regulate, I don't know, medicine or law or finance or pharmaceuticals or construction or whatever. It would just be too difficult, and there'd be so many ways around it that it would be pointless anyway. But to be honest, by definition, the profession is semi-regulated because it's pan-sector. And so some of those project professionals will be working in regulated sectors where there is an expectation. So I think, there's a kind of semi-regulated environment anyway. To then think about, so what is the value? Why? I think really what you're asking me is why should anybody bother? It's going to cost them money. It's probably a lot of effort and so on.
Time, money, effort,
Now, some of it is around it's the kind of the expectation, and we are seeing that increasingly. So if I take government and public sector as an example, if you want to be an SRO, senior responsible owner for a project in government, then there is a requirement now that you have to be either chartered or a fellow of the APM. So that in itself starts to drive standards. Now you might say, well, why is government doing that? They're doing that because they're talking about projects which are spending a lot of public money, and they want to make sure that public money is spent well. It's not about questioning anybody's kind of previous experience or their degrees or anything else. But the truth is, whether it's a degree, whether it's any other qualification, there is a difference between a qualification and a standard, and chartership as a standard. Now, let me just unpack the difference because it's in some ways quite subtle, this difference. A qualification is something that, it teaches you knowledge and skills, and once you've got it, you've got it. Nobody can take that away from you. Once you've got your degree, it's yours, right? Nobody can come back to you 10 years later and say, actually, we don't think you deserve that degree anymore. Only in a very small number of circumstances, but generally they wouldn't do that, right? A standard is something different. You have to maintain that standard, and you have to demonstrate continually that you are still at that standard, that you are still sufficiently competent to actually practice in that role. And that's what chartership is about. It's about, first of all, demonstrating that you're at that standard. And by the way, that those qualifications and experiences that you've had, they can be used as part of the evidence base to demonstrate that. But that alone is not enough. There's a professional practice element of it. So prove that you've already got a good track record of doing it. Prove that you have the technical knowledge as well, and then prove that you're kind of keeping on top of that and you are still current, because the reality is the profession moves. And that's the thing that I think individuals should buy into. They want to be able to demonstrate to prospective employers, and employers in turn want to demonstrate to prospective clients that they are at the required standard or beyond the required standard. They are competent, they are able to deliver the things that they're saying they're going to deliver, and that they are there with the latest thinking of the profession. And that's where the real value comes in. It's about that license to practice. It's about demonstrating that they're at the standard.
That's a really useful way to look at it. It's that, I suppose that it's, and I've been guilty of this myself. Sometimes I try to get, I've got my PMP and I've keep that continuing education, which you need to keep that in place. And so it kind of become a bit of a default to think about that. The organisation I'm in is very forward thinking and giving training. Very much, there's a bunch of books behind me there that I grab and read, and actually having an hour with people like yourself and many others on the podcast I see as part of that, keeping up with it and being able to do it. It's a really useful way of doing it. Sometimes you can get down there and you get your head down into the ground and you're just thinking, right, I just get on and do it. I know how to manage a project, I can do a Gantt chart, I can do a critical path. My risk log, I've got the same risk log I've been using for 40 years. It's really difficult sometimes to be able to lift your head up and see the value of doing some more training in something new. But then that point where you said, if you've got that chartership or you've got that PMP type thing, or any of the ones that have that continual revalidation, it by default, it makes you find out about those new things that you may not look for unless your organisation pushes you to. And I think it's really helpful from that perspective, from my view.
I would agree, and I think one of the things that makes chartership stand out from pretty much anything else that's that's out there is that it's not just about, I can tell you what the answers are. It's not about, I've read the textbook and I can regurgitate the textbook if you like. It's not even about saying, look, I've done a minimum number of, hours of professional practice. It's about more than that. It's about saying that the quality of that practice was sufficient, that it met the expected standards of the clients, people who are paying for this, that actually you are recognized as a professional in your field. It's the same argument for chartered accountants, chartered engineers, all of those. It's the same thing. If you had a choice between, if someone's going to do your accounts between a chartered accountant or another accountant, if you can afford it, you go for the chartered one, right? Of course you will, because you know that you're getting quality. You know that you're getting something that's going to be really meaningful, and that's what it's all about.
Yeah. That's really interesting, and it's a thing that I think is that continuing education. It's key. Obviously, doing this podcast, I believe in the education. I think everyone who's listening to it, if you pick up something like this, if you listen to any of the other 100 different project management podcasts, you're obviously keen on that learning and keen on keeping up to date what's going on. And I suppose, how do you, as an organisation, maintain that momentum to keep up? Because, and we'll talk a little bit about AI in a minute, but I'm trying to think how to do it. The way that we work now compared to the way we worked 5 years ago is almost chalk and cheese. It's ridiculous to think how different it was. The way I worked 5 years to 10 years before that, probably not as much different between those 10 years. Do you know what I mean? These 5 years, I think, have been transformational over that period. Now, it's interesting. I'm just coming up on 20 years joining the organisation I'm in now. And before that, I was running around the country with a laptop working for Oracle, doing consulting. I joined my current employer, and we were all using desktops. It was like desktops, and there was locked rooms, and it was an entirely sort of reminiscing a little bit, and just seeing that, it's like then there's some people got a laptop because, as I said before, they were executive enough. Then suddenly some people got a mobile phone because they were in. And now, do you know what I mean? It's kind of your laptops are running around. There's MacBooks. It's and you, as long as you're safe and secure, you're sat on the top of a mountain doing work. It's so different. But even so, that 5 years, the pandemic accelerated a lot of it. I know, but I think that again, AI is then going to be accelerating it even more. How do you, as an organisation, make sure that you're in front of the game? Because I know, looking at some of the education at the schools, some of the things my girls are taught, and some of the ways there, I'm thinking you're 4 or 5 years out of date sometimes on the industry sort of approach and things like that.
Yeah. So I think there's two aspects of what you're talking about. There's the how do we stay up to date in terms of ways of working, but then there's also how do you stay up to date in terms of just what's kind of current in terms of effective practice. So if I start with the latter question first, so one thing I would say is, APM is an organisation. We've got 160 staff there. But actually, the vast majority of those staff are not project professionals. We, like any organisation, we've got a marketing department and a finance department and a sales department and et cetera, et cetera. You get the idea. So we're not getting that, the latest thinking of the profession internally. We couldn't do that. So really, what professional bodies I think are good at is that they are good conveners of communities. And this is true of all professional bodies, I think. They rely on bringing people together, peer communities together, who are actually developing this new thinking, new ways of working, new practice, day in, day out, and are willing to share that in the wider interests of the profession. Now, they might not share it directly with their competitor for all kinds of reasons and commercial sensitivities. But you know what? They will share it with their professional body because they have an interest in raising standards in the profession, because that's a rising tide lifts all ships type argument, and they get as much out of that as they put in. In fact, they probably get more out of it than what they put in, because there is kind of this greater than the sum of its parts type argument that happens there. So I think that's on the content side of things, how we do. On the ways of working, I think one of my personal kind of revelations, I suppose, having worked in this type of role for about 10 years now, is that there is no way that a professional body can replicate what's happening in the private sector and at a global level. It's just impossible. I mean, you said we'll talk about AI later, but I think it's kind of semi-relevant to this. If I was to say that APM was going to try and I don't know, create lots of new AI products for the project profession. One, we'd never be able to outpace the competitors. We just couldn't do it. We don't have the resource, the expertise, everything else. But two, is it even our job? I mean, ultimately, we're not a software development company. We're a professional body. It's not our job to do that, just as much as it wouldn't be our job to produce project management software of any other kind. What our job is, though, is to share what's out there, what's effective, what isn't, how that ties in with the kind of competencies, the knowledge, the skills frameworks that we've talked about, to actually share the kind of peer feedback of what's working, what's not, what's the kind of latest thought leadership in this space, and where things are working, actually put together frameworks that show people how to build those skills themselves, and how to develop themselves and move their organizations forward to deliver projects better. Ultimately, it's all about how do we improve project success, and how do we make more successful? How do we make more projects successful? And that's where our focus should be. So in a sense, to come back to your original question, how do we kind of keep ahead of it? I think it's our job to put the structures in place that allow everybody else to keep it ahead of it, rather than necessarily for APM as an organisation to be ahead of it. Frankly, professional bodies are really slow-moving organisations. The only ones I would say are slower are universities. Universities are really slow. You want to put a new course and it can take a long time to approve things. Professional bodies are quite slow as well, but that's one of their strengths. In a world of chaos where everything's changing all the time, professional bodies as those slow moving organizations that really take the time to think about something before they put it in their body of knowledge or their competence framework or their skills guides or whatever it is. You know that when you're picking that up, this is going to be tried and tested stuff, high quality, proven evidence-based things that you can pick up and use immediately. It's not something you've seen on a YouTube Shorts video that may or may not work. You can be absolutely confident.
Yeah, it's interesting, that concept of where I look at it as it's kind of that do no harm sort of approach, because you think about it, and I'm not sure about the APM membership and things like that. It's obviously in the tens of thousands, I would have thought. Yeah, I don't know those
45,000.
Yeah, so you've got 45,000 people, and if you start directing people in the wrong direction because you think, oh, we need to get out there for AI, that damages their career, it damages their confidence in you, it damages their businesses, their customers. So I can see how you kind of like, yeah, okay, here's a little bit of guidance from what we've seen so far, but you don't want to be just shooting from the hip, do you?
No, and also sometimes there are just a lot of different opinions about something, particularly something. And it's not just AI. I mean, if I take even something as fundamental to projects as risk management, there are some fundamentals that people agree on, but there's a lot of things that people disagree on as well, about what tools and techniques and how you measure things and whatever else. And what's interesting about that is, there are some things where we would say definitively, look, this is the way we think you ought to be doing stuff. But there are other things where we'll say, you know what, there's a range of different opinions on this. Let's share some of them with you, some of the evidence around that. And then our job is actually not necessarily to push people in a particular direction, but to help them to make an informed decision. And that's okay as well.
Yeah, I think the body of knowledge sort of concept is, and I kind of look at it, is a kind of, they're all best practice. They're not the only practice. You know what I mean? You can say, right, this is from the studies we've done, this is the best way of approaching this. It's not the only way to approach it, and in given circumstances, there may be other ways that would be appropriate in that organization. But this is and you can only be generic, can't you? From a wide generic point of view, this is more likely to be successful than another route. And whereas I think sometimes there is and I have a concept of too much governance on things, where it would be really easy to take a body of knowledge or a print manual and just follow everything for a 4-day project, which takes 400 days, but the activities are 4 days, because you could add all that governance around it, and you could spend forever adding all that governance around it. But you've got to, as a PM, you've got to, as someone implementing a PMO and taking these things, is kind of put those things in and say, right, what is appropriate for this delivery?
Yeah,
and sometimes you go, we ain't going to do it.
Yeah, what's appropriate and what's adding value? Because sometimes, I mean, if you take something like assurance, I suppose it would be easy to just assume that more assurance means better project outcomes. That's not necessarily true, right? I mean, there's countless examples, particularly in the public sector, right, where there's almost an expectation something's going wrong, we'll put more assurance in, more reviews, more accountability. And that it's actually the process of putting those things in slows projects down, slows the decision making down, which actually damages the project success rates and the outcomes and so on. So there are plenty of examples where greater assurance leads to worse project outcomes, which sounds counterintuitive, doesn't it? So there is a kind of optimum amount of assurance. I'm with you on that one.
Yeah, it's difficult. I remember I was having a conversation not very long ago where I saw something was happening somewhere, and I said, I know what's going to happen here. What's going to happen is there's going to be an additional review board put in and an additional review step, which is going to reduce the amount of time available for someone to do the work, which will then, from my point of view, reduce the quality of what's being produced. And then what will probably happen after that is another review will go in, which will reduce the time, which will mean and you just end up all the way down to the bottom where you compress the actual doing. So it's just the quality reduces. And like you say, it's work. How the hell you work that out sometimes, I don't know. But sometimes I look at it going, it's address the issues rather than add more. Because for me, if you are getting continual quality problems where you need to add these extra review gates in, address it here at the beginning of the problem, not at the end when you're reviewing it. So it should be, there's an input problem, not an output problem. So looking at that then it's kind of, well, okay, step back a bit. The previous gate, is there something on that previous gate we weren't doing that should be done to avoid us getting something at this next gate? And it's kind of, it's hard to do. Otherwise people wouldn't pay us to do these jobs, would they? So if it was simple.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, just thinking on the profession, and we touched a little bit on AI, and what I mentioned, obviously we met up the other day at the Synergy event last year, which is funny to say, in last year, and it was interesting that the people matter was the topic, and it's really interesting that people matter, and quite rightly, I think there was a lot of talk around AI and how it's going to impact on the profession, both positively, negatively, or not. Just there's that whole mishmash of where we are at the moment, because we're so early. It feels like it's mature, but it's so early in what we're going to do. What are your thoughts about the project manager in 5 years' time? As I say, things have moved to 5. What do you see as being the project manager? How have we changed, or will we have changed? And what do we need to get ourselves ready for? Maybe it's 10-year horizon or whatever.
Yeah, so I think there's again a couple of ways of looking at this. So there's about what's going to change for the individual, but then there's also what's going to change in terms of the roles that we will have in the profession. What types of roles will we have, and how will that be different to now? And I think if I start with the types of roles, let's imagine a world where some of the more process aspects of jobs are kind of done by AI. So you might, I don't know, something like schedule management. That seems something which is quite processy, probably would be relatively straightforward to automate and optimize using kind of AI technology, even that's available now. Okay, so let's say we do that. So what does that mean? So at the individual level, it means that the roles are going to be even more focused on getting good people, because there's no process to hide behind anymore. So all those people things around leadership and conflict resolution and managing teams and all of that type of stuff, that's going to become even more important, weirdly, in this world where all the process stuff's taken away, because that's what's left, right?
Yeah.
so that which again sounds slightly counterintuitive, but it's true. And then when you look at the kind of the profession side of things, if you've got all of this stuff that's automated, how do you know it's been done well? So someone looks at the schedule and says, right, has the AI spit out the schedule, here it is. Okay, how do you know if it's done a good job? Especially if you've got no one with schedule management expertise anymore, because it's not required and it might not be in the frameworks and so on anymore.
Yeah.
You're going to need somebody to do some level of assurance to make sure that what it's doing is any good. But those people who are going to do that won't exist. And if they do exist, they're going to be really expensive and hard to come by. And it's even harder to do the job right, because if you're coming to try and do that kind of assurance at the end of the process with no involvement at all, kind of in the input, that's actually much harder to do. So what I keep saying to organizations is, where you've got those risk or schedule people or other people where you think those jobs are less likely to be around in the future, don't just lose those functions altogether, because we might need a bit of that. A good analogy for me is the whole kind of driverless car type stuff that's going on. That hasn't properly taken off yet. The technology's there, but there are lots of ethical challenges and legal things and so on. But when that starts, when people first start having driverless vehicles, there's going to be this period of time where people don't really fully trust it yet. And you're going to be still in the driver's seat and have to intervene and make sure it's doing sensible things and so on. But after a while, people will say, yeah, it's very rare that I have to intervene. I've only had to intervene once this year. And then people will start saying, it's okay for me to sit in the back seat now. I'm confident in what's going on. And that's what I think will happen ultimately. We'll move through this kind of, we need the assurance bit. Eventually we'll get to this bit afterwards where we go, yeah, I'm happy now that, most of the time what it's spitting out is pretty good. And I think to get to that level of confidence, that's the bit that's going to take time. The technology will race ahead, but human comfort with using the technology, I don't think that's going to go as quickly as people think. Otherwise, I mean, to go back to the driverless car example, that would have been done 10, 15 years ago. The tech's been around for years, decades. Yeah. But that's the reason it hasn't been done. It's human comfort, and AI arguably amplifies some of those existing concerns.
Yeah, it's interesting because I remember listening to someone talk about some of the output that AI had done, that it was something like 98% accurate on what it had done. I can't remember whether it was going through a piece of text or doing something, whatever it was. And they pointed out the fact that a human would probably have been, if you'd given them those same text to summary and read through it, would probably be about 80% accurate on what they'd done, because some of the things that we did, we look for. No, it was listening. It was listening to and transcription. Um, I I couldn't transcribe. Slowly listening to transcribe, you see things that get errors with transcriptions. Even people who do transcription, there will still be errors and corrections and tweaks, or people. And I think the thing is we expect perfection sometimes from AI, and like you say, with a plan. A number of times I've sat with a plan with someone who's done it, and we're going through it, and I'm going, well, why is that there and that there? And they go, oh, no. And these are not people who don't know what they're doing. They're people who really know what they're doing. And it's just having that, there's always going to be something that doesn't quite make sense. And that ability to look at it and go, that 30,000 feet view of things, and ask the question that potentially you can't, because AI can't do it, but we need to be able to do it as PMs, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, the truth is that humans will, in the same way that AI can spot things that humans can't, humans can spot things that the AI can't, because the AI, it bases what it's doing on what it's seen before, right? I mean, I suppose that's quite similar to humans. It's kind of learned behavior, but it's obviously got a much broader data set to draw from, which is why it can be more accurate. But it also kind of follows a kind of logic. And so what can happen is you can get these AI hallucinations. I'm sure your listeners will be familiar with this. If they're not familiar, the example I sometimes...
causation.
Yeah, exactly. But the example I sometimes use when I'm describing AI hallucinations is like when they first brought out, or one of the evolutions of EFIT technology in the police force. They used to have this this thing where they you could describe the person, the criminal, who they're looking for, and the tech would like give you an image of the person. You'd say they've got bushy eyebrows and a beard and big ears or whatever it was, and it would produce the image, and it based those images off thousands and millions probably of images from kind of social media headshots. And what they found was these EFITs kept having a horizontal line appear through the neck. Why? What's this horizontal line? What's all this about? And it turned out that lots of these images, there were people standing in front of a horizon. And so the EFIT technology, the AI, essentially said, well, this horizontal lines appeared in lots of images. It must be a feature of the face in the same way that a nose and eyes and ears are. Now, a human looking at that would have immediately said, well, that's ridiculous. I know that's not a feature of the face, but the AI didn't know any better. And so that's an example of where I think you need that kind of human input. But that will kind of iron itself out over time. The name that they use for this kind of input is anti-hallucinogenic workflows. For companies that are interested, that's the thing to Google.
Oh, that sounds really interesting. It's something that it's like the it's funny. I think probably 2 years ago, the question that I was always talking to people about with every conversation was, we were talking about agile. We were talking about how agile affects project management, how the changes on things like that with it. Whereas now, in nearly every conversation, it is a conversation, because agile's kind of there now. It's just part of what it is. Now, but the AI becomes that next version of things that are going to happen, and I'm sure that in a few years there'll be something else that I'll be talking about, because those things are step changes, aren't they? They're not little changes to what's happened. That 18 months ago, the world just changed. It was never going to be the same once ChatGPT started doing what it was doing. It's brilliant ways that they can do it. Just thinking about other things I said I was going to chat to you about. Obviously, recently, last year, PMI and APM's relationship became a lot closer. A lot of work on joining the two communities together, really, I think, and that kind of having the leverage of the two organisations are really using that power of both of them. Do you want to just talk a little bit about where where the thinking would that come from. I'm imagining there was always going to be um, um, difficult to do that because obviously I always take the mick of the old Monty Python sketch. I think I mentioned to you last time of the People's Front of the GD and GD as People's Front, but sometimes the British Boxing Board of Control and all those. You get all these different little organisations, and they're all wanting to do the same thing for the same community. And trying to help them, but want to do it in a different way for valid reasons in many cases, or just historic reasons sometimes. What do you want to just talk about that journey that obviously you've just started on really with the two organisations?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth just pointing out the starting point for this as well, because not everybody will be familiar with this, which is that when APM became chartered and got that royal chartership from the Privy Council, there was a kind of legal challenge to that, which came from the PMI. And whilst that was all resolved, and it's one of the reasons why actually you don't need to be a member of APM to be chartered. You can be a member of any kind of professional body. It was one of the kind of concessions that we made. But the point is, because there'd been this kind of legal challenge, there was, let's say, tension between the organisations. This predates my time, right? And as you can imagine. And the reality was, it also predated my, my counterpart's time at PMI. This predates even Pierre as well. And on day one of my starting in the role, I was kind of told about these difficulties, and I thought, well, this isn't in the interest of the profession. The profession would expect its professional bodies to be working together. So irrespective of what's happened in the past and legal challenges or anything else, commercial, competition, whatever, it's still, there are always going to be things where it's in our interest to work together. And in my mind, what I was thinking is, the commercial model, the retail commercial model that you see with, let's say, fast food restaurants, where if you go to an out of town or even an in town, you'll find these food courts where all the competitors work together. They're in and everybody knows it doesn't matter which restaurant you're going to go to. That's the food court. In my mind, that was the kind of principle I had, which was, look, we don't have to. This is not about saying we agree on everything and mergers and all of this type of stuff. This is about saying it's in the interests of our customers, of our members, to actually make it easier for them to join the dots up between what we do. So day one, I made a phone call to the person who was then the acting chief exec of PMI, and they were on the same page. So it wasn't I didn't have to convince them; they didn't have to convince us. It was one of those where when we had the conversation, it was like, maybe we should have had this conversation earlier, But so we started working on this actually probably 3.5 years ago. But then it takes time actually saying, okay, so we know there's an appetite to do something. So what do we do? Where do we kind of focus our efforts? And obviously, PMI appointed a new, new chief exec and president and so on. So that takes a bit of relationship building as well. But ultimately, we decided that one of the areas where we could really make a difference is that obviously PMI have their PMP qualification, APM has its PMQ qualification. One of the things we regularly heard was people saying, look, we've got one of those qualifications, we want to become chartered, but you don't recognise these qualifications, can you? And so that was where we started. And what it means now is that the professional practice element of either the PMP or the PMQ is now recognised, so that you have a shorter route to become a chartered project professional. And by the way, this isn't something that APM has kind of just unilaterally decided. PMI had to agree to this and to kind of provide the evidence that their qualification met that standard and so on. So they had to play an active part in this. And by the way, we had to put our own qualification through that same application process and get it assessed independently to make sure. So it was very rigorous. This was not about putting commercials over kind of standards. We wanted to make sure everything met the absolute standard, and it's right for the profession. And I have to say, the feedback from people I talk to has been nothing but positive. Why wouldn't we be doing this? In fact, the question I get asked more often than anything else is, what's next? Where else are you going to work together? What else are you going to do? Good question. I don't know the answer, but we're having active conversations all the time.
Yeah, and it's one of those things I was delighted to see. I said way back I got my PMP, and had my PMQ, and I've been looking at different routes and doing chartered. When the chartered come out, I looked at it, and then it's kind of right. Okay, when am I going to get round to doing that? I'll do it. And then when I saw that
Yeah.
come through as well, because I think it was at a time where I needed to do something slightly different on top of the PMQ. I might be getting my head mixed up on it, but seeing that, I thought it was a really bold step from both organisations, because I think there'd been, as you say, there'd been that tension before, and it was obviously taken with the interests of the community at heart, which you don't always see with with these conflicting organisations, do you? You don't always see that kind of collaboration, and as I say, for me it was a really hopeful thing to see, because I think the two organisations that are just, you have a different take on things, you have a slightly different lens on things, but they are brilliant, and I think part of that is going to be a little bit taste and fancy with individuals on which kind of engagement, which kind of organisation they deal with, because we all have different flavours of what we like, and I think but both are as valid as each other, and therefore it gives us that that double bubble, as you said. You got that some of the parts is much greater than there's two individual organisations. So it's really, I think it's quite exciting things to look forward to in the future, hopefully.
Yeah, I agree, and it'd be remiss of me not to encourage you to become chartered now. After I've heard that you've got the PMQ and the PMP,
it's on my list, and it's, as you say, and it's partly getting me convinced as well, and then procurement societies and things like that, and getting the funding, because it actually is a serious point. It isn't an insignificant investment to do it, and you've got to convince yourself with all the other, I know all of us out there, whether they be organisational funds or whether they be personal funding, that justification of doing it is probably one of the hard things to do, because you'll have people, as you say, they'll have gone and got their degree, they'll have got that PMQ, they'll have gone and got all of the other different stuff, and it's another one that, whilst it is, you can understand that you can get the understanding of why that recognition is valuable. It's always that it's valuable in the future, not today, sort of thing for you as an individual. Because it's that thing. If you're out looking for another job, you're kind of thinking, "Oh, I wish I'd done it 6 months ago." And it's, you know what I mean. But if you're not, you're thinking, "Oh, I'll do that in 6 months." You know what I mean? I'll go to the gym. I will go to the gym, but I won't go now. But then when you're 4 stone overweight, you're thinking, I should have gone 6 months ago. And I think that's, you know what I mean? It's that human nature thing, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I get where you're coming from. I think, the kind of the value proposition from an individual perspective is probably the strongest there is around chartership, because we know, because we do a salary survey every couple of years, so we know that those people who are chartered versus those that are not, they tend to have higher salaries, and quite significantly higher salaries. They tend to work on bigger projects. They tend to lead projects rather than just kind of be part of project teams and so on. They tend to be more likely to be involved in projects that have got ESG at their heart, and so I think there's quite compelling evidence, I would say, of the very immediate return on investment for something like that. So I think that's the first point about. The second point, which I don't know if you're aware of this as well, which is, you're right to say it's not cheap to invest in these kinds of standards and so on. But APM actually makes zero profit, or zero surplus, I should say, on chartership. So part of the arrangement that we have with the Privy Council, obviously signed off by the royal family and so on, and because of our charitable status, is that any money we make goes back into obviously the system. But for chartership specifically, we are only allowed to charge what it costs us to actually deliver. So we never, there's no margin on that. There's no on cost. We that is literally what it costs.
Yeah, and it's kind of understandable, because but you look at what needs to be done and how to administer it and manage it and all that sort of stuff, and it's not. I think the value for money side of it, and I don't know definitely, but I'm assuming to get chartership as an accountant, to get as an architect or an engineer, it's probably quite a bit more than what you would be as a project manager. They're probably historically a lot more expensive. So I think
a lot of it it depends on pathways. You know, so you use accountancy as a great example. You know, it depends. Have you done an accountancy degree which might be recognised, for example?
Yeah.
You know, have you, you know, is your company back in your organisation? So we get one of the things we see a lot, whether it's membership or qualifications, even if individuals pay for some of those things, it's quite common for the company to actually reimburse that in some way, not least because they know that they're going to win more business from it, you know. And when it comes to chartership, I know that there are companies who, when they're bidding for public sector contracts, they're using the fact that they've got a certain proportion of chartered project professionals to give them a competitive edge, and they can charge a better daily rate because they've got more highly qualified professionals. So, you know, so they do make that money back in different ways. So the money for them to pay for the qualifications and the standards in the first place more than makes its return for them.
I do. It reminded me. When I was looking on the chartership the other day. You have got a little pro forma letter to be able to convince if people want to get their company to contribute. The bang for the buck letter that can help them with that. So if people are interested, jump on the chartership. I know there's a pro forma Word document to send to someone's boss. Say, look, this is why you should pay for me to do this sort of thing.
Absolutely.
I can't remember what it said exactly, but I remember seeing it and thinking, oh, that's quite interesting.
Good shout. Good shout.
I'm just noticing we're just coming up on a close of our time now. And it's been a really fascinating conversation. I think it's understanding that whole APM and the sort of that ethos behind this really, really interesting background for me and where you see things going. Was there anything that, obviously, when we were talking about this, you were thinking, "Oh, a point I want to make, or something I would have liked to have chat about that I've not addressed because I've gone down my usual rabbit holes."
I think the only thing I'd say is, you know, we've talked a lot about kind of qualifications and standards and chartership and everything else. If people are interested in knowing more about those things or membership, then they can find out more about that on the APM website, which is apm.org.uk. And also, I'm mindful that we've discussed some really interesting stuff today. It certainly made me think. You know, I would just say that APM and me personally are on LinkedIn. We're very easy to find. Just type in our names and we'll be the first on the list. But you know, I'd encourage anybody who wants to kind of continue the conversation or connect with me or the organisation to absolutely do that.
Brilliant. Yeah. And just another one that there was thinking that actually I took us down this route, and I know that one of your key things there is, whilst that the qualifications are there, it's that community and those events and that general uplifting of education. And as part of that membership, I know there's great deal of events that are run all around the country and remote events that are kind of free when you've joined and stuff. And there's the corporate membership as well that I've seen that I know organisations have got. That again is not ridiculous. You'll probably say this, and from my understanding, the value of it, the cost of it compared to the value of it is quite good for what people would get out of it if they wanted to. So if you've got an organisation, if anyone listening, anyone who's listening, yeah, exactly. Anyone who is listening who's got a corporate organisation, they've got a team of project managers, it's probably worth having a look at that and seeing what value they can grab from that. Brilliant. Well, as you said, contact details for you, LinkedIn. I know that's how I stalked you and eventually met you at the event. So, and the APM, I'll put all them links in the show notes, etc., so people can get hold of them. Finally, just thank you very much for coming on the show. Really interesting conversations. Made me think a bit more. I'll probably pull my finger out on the chartership this year.
I look forward to receiving your application.
Yeah, I'll get there. It's just sitting there and doing it as well. Brilliant, Adam. You have a wonderful rest of your evening. Thank you for giving me so much time.
You too. All the best. Take care.
Cheers, mate.
In project management, we face a common problem. The plan differs from reality. It leads to undesirable consequences, such as failure to deliver a project on time, financial loss, loss of customer and management trust, and many others. Why does it happen? The reasons may be different, but the most common among them are mistakes during the planning phase, uncoordinated teamwork, lack of information on the project progress. In Gantt Pro, we have thought through all the details to minimize these risks, both at the planning and implementation phases. At the planning phase, you save your time. Gantt Pro is an intuitive tool. In 10 minutes, you and your team will manage projects skillfully. Create a detailed and visual plan that answers what and when questions at any stage of your project. Minimize the risks of overdue tasks. Cut expenses by assigning resources like budget, time, and labor cost. You'll take into account all the constraints in advance. Planning is our strength, but we also made Gantt Pro an ideal tool to use at the implementation phase. At the implementation phase, you invite your team in the already created project and start working without any delay and confusion. Spend less time on meetings and discussions. Avoid overdue tasks and expectations. Everyone receives notifications about the workflow and gets other means for organized teamwork. Evenly distribute workload and avoid employees over-allocation. Get information on possible risks in advance and remove them timely. Have at-hand information on the project progress. Keep track of its high-level status and even project portfolios. Also, Gantt Pro gives a possibility to share your project with customers and clients at any stage, both for pre-sale and demonstration of the current state. Export reports to popular formats, keep documentation and communication around tasks in real time. With Gantt Pro, you always know when a project ends, how many resources are needed, who is working on what, and identify risks of overdue tasks at early stages. Plan with Gantt Pro, professionally and easily.
Well, it's goodbye from me, Nigel Creaser, and it's goodbye from him, the Sunday Lunch PM. Goodbye.